I'm Marco, and I will talk about using node.js for front-end projects. So, why do we can use a server-side technology for a front-end? Well, first, to kick off a project, as we saw, we can use everything that Pelle showed into a front-end project. Now we can also speed up repetitive tasks that we used to do in front-end, like resizing or compressing, optimizing images, creating sprites for CSS, stuff like that. Reduce human errors, we saw a lot, and test also, same stuff. And optimization. In front-end, it's common practice today to minify assets like CSS and JavaScript, or we would like to build our complex front-end application using like node.js. Node.js like requires, so we want to use some module system to resolve dependencies and stuff like that. That's why we use node.js in our front-end. How do we use that? Well, through Grunt and Gulp, they are two big projects that are task runners, so they allow us to configure our setup to be an automation of tasks that run every time that we need. We use projects like LastCSS or SAS to pre-process our CSS, so to add some more capabilities to the CSS language. Webpack or Browserify are again two big projects that aim to bring some module system features to the front end, so your JavaScript can do stuff like require other files, and at the end you obtain bundles of files that the browser can digest and run. And then we use projects like Karma and Mocha that are specifically conceived to run unit tests, or even with Karma we can run even functional tests, limited functional tests on a real browser. What do we do with all these projects? Well, asset management is the simplest thing that we can introduce. So, like image optimization, there are a lot of libraries that are packed for Grunt and Gulp. You basically find for the both system almost the same plugins or the same libraries. So we can take a folder with our source images, like big high-resolution images, and produce different kind of sizes or compressions or different optimization versioning all in one single step without taking care of manually exporting that. If you ever did an iOS web application, you have one single logo that you want to use as basically from favicon to the home screen icon. You have to export this single image in more than 22 combination to match all the iOS versions, Android versions, web versions, Retina, no Retina. You go crazy. You can automate. You can automate this process. CSS sprite generation. Okay, sprites are step by step going out of the picture with other ways to optimize images, but they still used, and there are ways to take care of all the images that are used into CSS and automate the generation of a sprite, so you don't waste time in manually compose the sprite and take it out all the dimensions and the reference. File name manipulation. Okay, this is worth a discussion of its own, but we know cache in browsers works in mysterious ways. So sometimes just change a name is the safest possible way to drop any cache. Okay, and for images or for CSS, we can just prefix or postfix or suffix the name of our assets with the version of the project. So maybe taking all the images and postfix with the version that we fetch from the package.json. This should be completely automated, so you are sure that every time you release a new minor or major release, everything goes out of cache without even think of it. Simple is safest to me. CSS, specifically with CSS, which is the visual part that we use in front-end, we can pre and post process our files. Preprocessors are more or less, they add functionalities to the base CSS language, like variables and simple functions, stuff like that. Post-processors can do a lot of help, helps a lot. They can add browser prefixes, or they can run through the code and highlight repeated instructions, so we can optimize, or they can optimize the CSS for us by stripping out everything that is not needed. Concatenation and minification, so you structure your project with a lot of files that are then bundled and squeezed into one single optimized file to reduce the footprint and maybe compress it even. Assets inlining is another task that is perfect to be automated. So you refer external images in your CSS, and then when it's time to bundle, you pack them into the CSS in base64 and call it. This should be an optimization or a de-optimization. It all depends on your project. Critical path is an argument that is becoming extremely important today when it comes to create, especially for isomorphic applications, which start with begin to render in the server and they continue their life in the browser. You want to extract only the minimal amount of CSS that are needed for the first quick bootstrap. There are modules that do that for you, or that you can use and configure to do that. Maybe it's not that simple. When it comes to JavaScript, again, we should simply concatenate and minificate many JavaScript files. Standard web page, which use jQuery and at least 16 plugins, you can squeeze it. Okay, it gives you a lot of performances. A lot of WordPress blogs can really take advantage of this simple task. Transcompiling, we talked before about the ES6, so we can already use it even in browsers, not for all the features, but for some feature we can already use ES6 with a transcompiling layer. Okay, I will show later an example in which we can use basically some the short version of the functions, and even a module for require files in the browser that will be compatible with the IE6 definition. And then we have the opinionated bundling systems like Webpack or Browserify that they have some kind of proprietary, it's not really the word, but some opinionated way to provide modularity into the browser. So like CommonJS or AMD. Those are the two more famous. Then we use this stuff for quality assurance. We saw extensively about linting and doing static analysis on the code. We can enforce the code style and run tests that run quickly on a browser or even on a headless browser, so you don't even see them, but they just ensure that your code is safe, that it doesn't go against the test that you already wrote for your code. The tools that we use, that we see today, are those two, Gulp and Grunt. They are two big projects, open source, and they are task runners. So they gives you the basic ground to run a lot of tasks, one after the other, or one with others. So why those two? They apply two different approaches to the same project, to the same problem. They are both good. There is no winner here. It depends to me. I use both in different scenarios. It depends personal preferences and also what the project requires. Grunt, as we saw, is based on configuration and is task-centered. So it lives around the concept of a task that does one thing by name. So it has a name, so like linting, and you define with a configuration rule the files that you want to pass to this task, and this task will do what it does and it ends. And then you can run another task. In GulpJS, it applies, it does the very same thing, but in a really different way. It is based on streams. A stream is a concept that it comes from the very beginning of the Unix development as a system. It was quite difficult in the beginning for me to pick it up, but it's a really powerful mechanism in which you take the output of a filter and you give in as input of another filter. And with filter, I mean a function that modify modifies this data, this stream. A stream can be whatever kind of data. In Gulp case, they are just files. So again, if you want to lint some files, you identify the files that you want to lint, and you create a stream. That means that each file is streamed down to a list, one or more filters. One filter can be the linter. Another filter can be a minifier. We'll see an example later, a running example. So far, let's see the basic structure of a runt file and a gulp file. So runt is based on a configuration. It takes one or more plugin. So each plugin that you load into the runt file requires you to configure, and you can specify one or more target for each plugin. So each plugin can be configured in different ways based on what you want to achieve. At the end, you can register one or more tasks that put together a combination of plugins and targets. So you can say, please lint the files that I need for my, I don't know, first part of development. So you identify in this target just a subset of files in which you want to apply a configuration. Or then you ask the, we don't see here, what did you do? Okay, you can put stuff together in this way. A gulp file is a little bit different because you create a task, so it runs with the concept of a task, and you give it in a name. But this task, this name doesn't reflect one single thing. You will identify a list of files, so a group of files, exactly like you do in Runt. But then you can use the pipe function to stream those files into one or more filters. So in this little example, I am compiling those files with SAS. I am minifying those files, and I wrap this, if I am in a development configuration, I wrap with a source map plugin that will create a source map for me. So it's just a different way to describe the automation that you want to obtain. Runt is more configuration-oriented. Gulp is more scripting-oriented with this concept of piping. So taking the output of one filter and giving as input of another one. Okay. To me, Gulp is extremely interesting when you have to work with source files, like taking some HTML entry files and applies like variable replacement, placeholders, inclusion, stuff like that. It works extremely fine in this scenario. If you just have to apply standard plugins, I think that Grunt is way simpler to start up and configure compared to Gulp. So it just depends on you, what you need and what you want to do. Okay, that was the beginning. So then I prepared two little Grunt and Gulp setup just to show you some running code. So let's see, this is for the Grunt. I have prepared this impressively complicated application which says hello world, and it has a CSS and it has a JavaScript application. Okay, the CSS, it doesn't exist. I've created a less source file. Okay, so it's a file that needs to be compiled or processed into a CSS. In this case, I'm using a variable to apply the background color. So again, extremely complicated, but we will make it to work. The JavaScript is a little bit more tricky because I have here some function like this log function that does not exist in this file. It is it is defined in another file. So I have a concept of a library and an application. The application needs the library to be loaded before, stuff like that. Okay, and yeah, the HTML is straightforward. We want the CSS and we want a single JavaScript file that do everything. Let's see how we can do that with Grunt. Better? Okay, here we go. We have the Grunt task. The Grunt configuration file again is made with configuration of plugins. So I will use a clean plugin that is conceived to clean directory, delete files, a copy plugin which takes file from a source and it copies into a destination. Less linting, it will apply what we saw for CSS lint, what we saw for the JS linting, so static analysis to a less source file. It's quite useful. JS int, we saw it before. Last compiler, it will take the last source code and it will transpile into a running CSS. Same for JavaScript. We use this uglify module that will take one or more JavaScript file, it will squeeze together in one single file, and I think it can apply some other functionality like compress this file to have a little footprint. Okay, and stuff like that. In the end, we load the plugins, same thing we saw before. And we can configure what are our main tasks. So I want, in my terminal, we do it in a minute, I want just to build my project for a development purpose. So I want to take these source files and be compiled to something that I can run in the browser, but I want to see the full source code if I want to dig into the files. Okay, so no compression at all. I want to have source map. So if a JavaScript raises an error, I don't want to see the error in the big bundle that is generated, but I want to see the error in the line and in the file that I coded. Same for CSS. Let's give it a try. This is the first. So this is the source file. I have my application, I have my Grunt file, and of course I have the node module folder. If I run Grunt build, it will run the tasks that I defined, and it will generate a folder in which I have my CSS, generated CSS, the JavaScript, the source map, and the file. Let's see if it works. There we go. Hello world. Yoo-hoo. I've put a simple console log, and what we see is that the code that is referred into the console is my source code. Is the very library source code that I wrote in my editor. But if we take a look at the JavaScript that had been compiled, it contains both the library and the application. Okay, a source map allow the browser to allow Chrome browser to point me to the file that I wrote. With this level of complexity is quite unuseful. But when an application grows to some thousandth line of code, it will be air for you to breathe. You cannot work without this kind of feature. The same goes with CSS. Of course, this you don't want to do that with you don't want to do that when you release your application, because when application go live, you don't want source map. You want your code to be the last possible, to have the little possible footprint. So you can configure to do grunt release. Did I did it? What does it do? If we go back to the Grunt file, we can see that for the copy task, I have created two targets. Okay, one is build something and the other is release something. So when I run my build or release task, I'm asking Grunt to run some of my plugins with different configurations. At example, if we take the uglification, so the bundling and compression of the JavaScript, for my build, I want source map. I don't want any modification in my source code. So even if I open the output file, what was compiled, I can read what I wrote. It's all together, but it's what I wrote. But when I want, when I need to release my application, I don't care about that. So even I can even ask the uglifier to even remove all the console warning that I wrote in my application, because the end user, I mean, my mother that sees my application doesn't care about the warnings. It's something that is made for me or you developers that help me in building the application. So that's stuff that we can do. Even better, we can even configure our Grunt task to compile, to create the releases into some versioned folder. So each time we do a release, we can put those files into a folder that belongs to the package.json version. So if now I do an impressively update and I decide that this is a major update in my project, next time I release the project, it will just add the version 1.0 in which to push this stuff. Okay, with Grunt we have we can use plugins that takes this folder and push it into GitHub, push it into an FTP file, whatever. And you can always create your custom task and do whatever with node.js or with a bash script that you run. Okay, so simple tasks that automate your job. Let's see the Gulp version. Really similar. So I have another application that does almost the same. The structure is the very same, a gulp file in which I put the description of my automation that I want to achieve, and the node modules that contains my dependencies. So let's start by building the application. Okay, this application is way more complicated. We have the very same concept, so an HTML file. An HTML file. Here there is something that I found, just little modules for you to see that I found that can do inclusion of some HTML file into others. Then I have my CSS and my JavaScript. They work exactly the same. Here I'm using Sass instead of Flash, just to show you. And I have a dependency on the Bootstrap project that is defined as a node dependency. So I automatically download and keep update my Bootstrap project from which I want to use just the standard CSS. Okay, simple stuff. So in my HTML I can define a container and do whatever I want. JavaScript, let's take a look at the application here. Oh, what is that? This is ECMAScript 6. We have a map to an anonymous function which is defined in ECMAScript 6 language. So this will never work in any current browser, but as we saw, it does. Okay, and if I log, I will go straight into the source file. There is another thing that I want you to notice about JavaScript. This line. Okay, this is okay. Current state is still in a draft mode, but is likely the way that we will use inclusions, that we will resolve JavaScript dependencies in the future. Okay, it will go over CommonJS, and this will be the standard way to include resources. So here I am importing two symbols from another file that happen to be the same library that we used before. This is far from being standard JavaScript that my Chrome can execute. So take a look how we achieve this stuff. In Gulp, we load all the plugins first. So they are simple functions. They are the dependencies of my project. And then, again, I just define tasks. Tasks requires some set of files. Okay, here I've exported some parameters in a configuration that we can delegate from to a project like the one we saw before, to have a standard configuration for all our projects that can be updated and so forth. It was a really good idea, and this is a little step toward this solution. So like for the HTML, I want all the HTML from my application folder, but not the ones that starts with an underscore. So I want to copy only the entry points of my HTML and stuff like that. And I can take these files and apply them to filters. One filter is like this gulp file include that allows me to load to manage inclusion, that can even understand markdown. So by including stuff that will be transpiled into HTML from a markdown syntax, then I can pipe this stream to a destination. So say, okay, you have this stream, you did something with it, and then you save it there. Okay, simple stuff. I can even create conditionals. So when in Grunt I have two different targets to define what to do for a development scenario and what to do for a release scenario. In Gulp, I have the same task that can behave in different ways based on variables. In this case, I just want a mode in my configuration, nothing fancy. The most of the time, you use the environment variable configuration for doing this kind of activity. JavaScript is the very same. We basically pack all our definition or our task into the source map sandwich. Then we use some other modules that do the magic of transpiling from ECMAScript 6 to use the ECMAScript 6 module loader, and the very same with the CSS. Okay, so exactly the same outcome, two different ways to do that. What to do, it depends on your decisions. I stop here because this was basically what we do with frontend. This was just showing you some ideas and the two systems, and then there are literally thousands of plugins of modules that you can plug into this structure, and you can also write your own. Thank you.